Trump says U.S. will run Venezuela after America captures Maduro. On January 3rd, 2026, U.S. forces captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro during a surprise operation in Caracas and transferred him to the United States to face long-standing federal charges related to drug trafficking, narco-terrorism, and weapons conspiracies. The operation marked an unprecedented escalation, the extraterritorial arrest of a sitting head of state without UN authorization. President Donald Trump framed the move as part of a broader campaign against transnational crime and regional instability, warning that further action could follow if Venezuela's interim leadership fails to cooperate. While Trump claimed the U.S. would exert decisive control over Venezuela's transition, American officials have stopped short of announcing direct governance. Inside Venezuela, Vice President Delcy Rodriguez assumed interim leadership, condemning the operation while seeking diplomatic engagement. International reaction has been sharply divided, with allies warning of sovereignty violations and regional destabilization. The episode has reopened debates over U.S. power, international law, and the future of hemispheric order. So, does this signal a return to sphere of influence politics, where sovereignty is conditional and the rules are rewritten by the strongest actors?
I would say we're getting a lot closer to that for sure. I mean, you and I were talking about this the other day. Here's what I really see. So prior to this move in recent history, if the government was going to go into a country and snatch a leader or start killing people, generally they would have had to kill Americans directly. I mean, so they're using this, well, you trafficked cocaine. Cocaine is cut with fentanyl that's coming through China, that's going through Mexico. So they're kind of using that as like kind of a proxy. It's not really maybe the wrong word, but they're using it as a conduit, an excuse perhaps. But there's no direct like, hey, this many Americans were killed by this person. There was no military action by the government is what I'm saying. So this really lowers the threshold that it takes for a superpower to walk into a country and snatch a leader, take control of the nation, and then try to correct its course, for lack of a better way of looking at it. Now, I'm not saying that's right or wrong right now. I'm just not. I'm not really weighing in on this. I kind of want to see how things play out. But now that this has happened from the U.S., don't be surprised if you start seeing China and Russia sort of flirting with the same actions, because it's kind of like the way I see this is kind of like the Overton window in society. You know, Overton window is an acceptable sort of window of speech, what we can talk about. And Trump is actually a master of stretching that Overton window and very much controlling the speech. So I'll give him credit for that. But I think superpowers operate in a similar vein where, you know, if you are going to go into a country and take the leader, or you're going to start a war there, et cetera, there's a number of things. You kind of look at the other superpowers or people in the same category as you, and you see what they're willing to do, how far they're willing to go. And that kind of sort of sets the bar, so to speak. So in my opinion, the bar got a lot lower when he did this. Again, not really weighing in on whether it's right or wrong. We can have that conversation afterwards. But that's one thing, just to sort of answer your question directly. Now, how this all plays out, I mean, here's the reality. Venezuela was probably the most Western location in terms of like Western and sort of viable economic leverage within Venezuela because of the oil that Russia and China had control over. You know, Russia's been able to sort of operate kind of at will, regardless of the sanctions, because they've had other trading partners, whether it's India, China, places like Venezuela. So Russia and China have been extrapolating all their resources anyway.
Not even just extrapolating, but places like Venezuela play a key role in their ghost tankers and stuff like that, where Russia is using, essentially diverting it through third parties, their oil, to get around sanctions. Right,
exactly. So this takes that pawn off the board for them. So this will certainly ruffle their feathers. But I was talking to someone the other day, and I'm sorry, I'm going to jump around because I know this particular topic is just very sort of divergent. I was talking to a couple people from Venezuela. They were all very happy. Anybody that I spoke to that's from Venezuela, I did not talk to one person that was upset that Trump jumped in there and did this. No, so they were all pleased. And one of them I had an interesting conversation with, and he's like, look, I understand that the U.S. is just going to be taking our oil. I get it. I understand. Hopefully there's enough in it for the country to rebuild the economy. I said, I think that there will be, based on how the U.S. operates. I would suggest that that's the case, you know, more so in a form of capitalism and democracy versus autocracy, which you're sort of seeing there. So what's interesting for Venezuela, if they hold legitimate elections and say Machado wins, who's now favorable to the West, you may see a semblance, or like you may see democracy sort of rekindled there. I think it'll probably be a bumpy 6 to 12 months, no matter what. Just to transition people that are kind of still towing the old line. I just, that's what I think will happen. We'll see how it plays out. But like I said, the people that I've spoken to seem happy about where things have landed currently. So I guess we'll just see how it plays out. One thing that surprised me, which I told you, was that Trump basically said, hey, US is going to run the ship here. That was a little surprising.
Yeah. And so I think too, I think the in charge comment is more of just you're going to bend the knee and do whatever we say, not that they're actually going to be in there in an administrative capacity or anything.
Probably a military capacity though.
Well, he was threatening, saying it's pretty much do what we say or we'll be in there in that capacity. So I think what you're most likely to see is them just bend the knee. However, there is definitely a possibility where it could go the other way and you start having internal power vacuums in different factions fighting for power within Venezuela, whether there's another military coup or something of that nature. But at the same time, when you have a regime that has deepened itself into a country so much like the Maduro regime did, there's not much opposition in there. So it's not like there's all of these differing groups and all of that are now vying for power. It's like the opposition has already been wiped out.
Yeah, there's no powerful rebel groups, you're saying. Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
So yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how that all plays out. You see a lot of comparisons to the Middle East and Iraq and Afghanistan regime change. Now, I do think America historically has had a very poor record of regime change. But however, it is important to note where they have been successful is places like Japan and Germany post-World War II, where there was already deep institutions.
Mm-hmm.
Like the idea that you can go and take Afghanistan or Iraq, which neither of which had anything that you could declare as like an advanced society.
Right. Yeah.
It's more so that Venezuela had an advanced society and then it got captured by corruption and socialism. Because like post World War II in the 1950s, I believe it was number 4 on the list, but definitely top 5. Venezuela was ranked globally in terms of GDP per capita.
So and almost the highest GDP per capita in South America before 99. So up until 1999, they were actually doing quite well. I'm sure there was probably a couple turbulent years, 97 to 99, like that I'm not aware of. But yeah, they were doing great. And then, like you said, it was just socialism, authoritarianism. And then it was just basically like, you're under the boot or get out of here.
Well, it's funny how that all went, especially because for a while Venezuela was being held up as the socialist dream by all Western leftists in the early 2000s because they had gotten so rich from oil. It's also important to note that they sit on the globe's largest oil reserves, but they also did not diversify their economy at all. At one point, it was 90% of their exports, 40% of their entire GDP. But that made them extremely left open to global changes in oil prices, could fluctuate their economy like crazy. And that's what you saw is they got essentially oil rich. Then they said, yay, we're going to use all of this for socialism. Then they put these policies in place. Everybody started celebrating them for a few years because their universal education and their healthcare system did actually improve after those first few years of these programs. But then as soon as their economy started retracting due to the global oil prices, and especially in the 2008 financial crisis era, they just doubled down on those programs, even though they were losing money. And that's how they ended up getting to where they were. And then it just became more about, okay, we're not actually going to fix our economy. Just how do we retain control? And that's especially what unfolded during the Maduro years. But yeah, it'll be an interesting question whether they can rebuild institutions, whether those institutions are so plagued by corruption that there isn't really...
That's what I was going to ask. That was actually going to be my next question. It's like, okay, we can agree that there's maybe perhaps an adequate infrastructure, but what has happened to the infrastructure over the last 25, 26 years? Because just looking at our infrastructure, our infrastructure is compromised in several ways, whether it's corruption or whether it's foreign interference. And you can kind of point at any one of them. They're hijacked in some sense. And that's in a country that is first world developed, right? So I wonder how bad they are there, and if they're not in good shape, like what can someone like Machado, let's say Machado gets in and she's pro democracy and she's pro West, just for example, it'd be almost like a conservative leader here. Well, I can draw the parallel because people will understand that. If you have a conservative leader here, you go, okay, well, everything's going to be great. Well, is it though? Because 87% of all teachers are liberals. This is a very recent statistic. So it's infiltrated by liberal ideology. Same with the media. It's infiltrated by liberal ideology. You're not going to get them to flip over in one day. It's just not going to happen. Same with the CBSA, which we know is severely compromised by foreign interference. So even if you change the head of the snake, so to speak, I don't think it necessarily changes the function of the institution. And I have to think, I would have to believe it would be similar there. And then the only way to clear it out would kind of be to go like the Argentina style, afuera, everything gone, like fuck it, you know? So you start shutting down all these institutions and organizations to replace them, but then you really like, this is why I say 6 to 12 months is going to be turbulent, because I think you need to do that to try to get any sort of semblance of decency within the nation. And this is obviously an assumption I'm making. I just figure based on how things operate here, they'd be similar there in terms of the institutions. So if you don't do that, you don't make any progress. So the only thing you can do is kind of take them down to the studs, right? So it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, next question for you though, on the same topic. Do you think he was right or wrong for this?
I don't know. I'm trying to think about it less in moral terms, because it really comes down to how things play out over the next 6 to 12 months. If it ends up being a shit show with a bunch of different factions vying for power, and then American interventionism has to go towards, a couple years long idea where now they're essentially wasting resources trying to just keep the state from collapsing in on itself and becoming a Yemen or a Libya of sorts, even though I don't see it getting as bad as, say, somewhere like Libya. But either way, just collapsing.
Yeah.
Then I think that's a failure, and you would say that that's bad. If it turns out the other way, where you do root out Russian and Chinese influence of the nation, and the Venezuelan people aren't just subjected to another warlord or drug trafficker. And because I mean, that's what's really important to keep in note here too, because if you think about the historical parallels, the closest would be Eastern Europe during the fall of communism in the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. And if you read McMafia by Misha Glenny, essentially his whole thesis is that, in that power vacuum, you just had organized crime take over governments and businesses. They just filled the shoes of the Soviet Union. You could have something like that happen here. That's another way that, things could go south, and you could say that this is bad. However, if he does restore some semblance of, what we classically would think of as democracy.
It's brutal.
Because I mean, it's just such a meaningless word at this point.
Agreed.
But if they do implement somebody that, creates large scale reform and brings back something mirroring free enterprise to Venezuela, and, breaks up the state monopoly of the entire nation, then I think you say it's a huge win.
Yeah. So the way I see it is, a couple things. So first, I would say, I don't think that it looks good on him that he was so anti-war, but since he's been in power, he's been sort of carrying out a pretty high volume war agenda, continuing to support or continuing to fund Ukraine. Now, I'm sure they'll make their money back in resources and in rebuilding and stuff like that. Like that's what America always does. But he did say he was going to stop. It's nice that the Israel-Palestine war is curbed for now. He did slow down a couple of other conflicts that were going on around the world, so give him credit for that. But I think this kind of goes against that initial agenda. Again, I'm not saying it's bad. I just think that that's a little not intuitive, but like sort of just not what he said he was going to do in a sense. Now, we were talking about earlier about it working out and how this is like, hey, this is something we have to see how it plays out over the next like 6, 12 months, couple of years, whatever. The amount of money that the United States will be able to extrapolate in oil, I think it's crucial for Trump. I actually think this is going to play out well, because I think he's going to put a lot of his pieces on the board to make sure that it does, which I think ultimately will be good for the people of Venezuela. Again, my opinion. This is what I think. The reason is because, I was listening to someone the other day, and I don't know enough about this, but it does make sense. Trump is having a successful year, He really is. If you objectively look at stats, he is having a successful year, even with all the tariff stuff everyone's bitching about. I mean, the economy's strong. A lot of people are saying that that's bolstered by the stock market, which is bolstered by AI. And they're saying, hey, if this crash happens, he could be in trouble, blah, 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 blah. And not really in trouble, but it'll just kind of hurt his year or the next year. But him replacing the amount of GDP, or not necessarily GDP, but the amount of resources he'll replace with oil from Venezuela, and how that will positively affect the American economy is actually so significant that it kind of wipes out a couple of other problems that he could have. It's a big safety net. Let's put it that way. So I think he knows enough to make sure that he plays this game properly down there. So I actually think it's going to turn out relatively well. And I think, this whole "we're in charge" thing, while I might not love that comment, I think he means like, I'm keeping my hand on the wheel here because I need to do it. Now, one of the things I did find interesting was how the left was responding. And I expected it. You expect the left to say all bad things, imperialism, blah, 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 blah. He's terrible, Nazi, whatever. I don't think they have a leg to stand on. I really don't. I mean, there's a couple of reasons why. And maybe this is me saying that it's good, but I'm maybe inadvertently in a sense, but like, it was a failed experiment. Socialism, communism, authoritarianism, it didn't work. That's where it landed. And it was very bad for a lot of people in the country. You can tell from just purely from the economics and the number of people dying. Number of people that were killed, at protests because of the last election was insane. So, okay, the country's not operating. So basically, the left has this utopia vision. Well, that's what happens. So we had to go correct course, or we being, you and I considering ourselves more on the right than the left. So that's one thing. The other thing is they were involved in the Israel-Palestine war in the left, and funding and continuing the war in Ukraine as well. So it's like everybody's a neocon these days. I don't see how anybody can push back and say, oh, that's bad that you did this. From a position of being supportive of the other party, I guess is what I'm saying. So I mean, it's kind of a weird spin on it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they have any standards or moral high ground to stand upon when casting judgments at this point. Like you were pointing out, they've been so all over the place. But when you do look at it as just, okay, we're in favor of socialism at all costs, again, it's really important to remember that these people, socialists and leftists, their ideas are more real to them than reality. So they actually see the world as, a mistake, and that the world would be perfect under their ideology. And then therefore we just need to move over to that. So, but when you see something like this, where Maduro is getting kicked out, well, okay, if it does go that route where, let's say, they implement a pro-American government, and then some semblance of free trade opens up in Venezuela and things get better for the Venezuelan people, then it has a lot less to do with the localized issue of Venezuela and much more, again, as it becomes just another example of why their worldview doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so it is kind of like a protection in that sense of their worldview.
Do you think that this could turn into another Ukraine in this sense? So the United States, it's open now that they instigated the coup in 2014, the Euromaidan. They basically let Russia take Crimea. They knew that it was going to instigate this war. It was a whole resource play, but basically what happened is you had a Ukrainian president that was favorable to Russia, going to sign a Russian agreement. They have basically instigate a coup, throw out that leader, install a Western favorable leader rather, and now then Ukraine's really no longer neutral. They're favoring the West, and now you've got this war that's happening. Now, that's a dummy version of it, but you get it. So you take out the leader in Venezuela. He's pro-Russia. He's pro-China. Well, this looks familiar. So do you think that there is a chance China and Russia, in some sense, try to mount opposition to this from a kinetic perspective, or at least supporting the Maduro Chavez type camp and being like, we can throw these guys over again. So like, let's say there's a democratic election. How deep is Russia and China into this, being like, okay, you want a democratic election? We're going to come in here heavy handed and try to push people around and make sure we can control this election. Do you think that you're going to see, and if that doesn't pan out, you see some kinetic war? Like, what do you think is going to happen there?
Well, yeah, I think no matter what, you're going to have all of these differing interests trying to push the outcome in their preferred direction. It's just really a question of how efficient and how effective they can be at doing so. I think there's some big differences in this regard, which is that Russia and China don't have the same amount of military bases and infrastructure in the South America as America does in Europe. If you look at the global map of U.S. military bases, it looks like chicken pox. It's just so that in and of itself is much different of a scenario. Plus, two, America is much stronger than Russia, and Venezuela is much weaker than Ukraine. So there's even a more great power imbalance between the two nations. But yeah, I think you're likely to see China and Russia try to use some leverage in whether it's even in soft power instances, right? Like through propaganda and election swaying and all of this kind of stuff. But I don't know if they can be as effective in propping up Venezuela in their preferred candidates as the West would be in Ukraine, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I'd wrap it up by saying this. I do think this gets us closer to a all-out war on the global stage. I don't think this goes in the right direction. This obviously goes in the wrong direction. And then the last thing is Maduro and Flores appeared in federal court today and both pleaded not guilty.
Mm-hmm. Actually, and the last thing that I want to say on this is just because you see so many people jump into, okay, is this is the reason for this oil? Is the reason for this democracy and liberation? Is the reason for this more conspiratorial? Like, oh, Israel wants the influence over that region. You've already seen people take that stance. It's just, you got to think about it the drug issue, all of that. It's like, you got to think about it just much bigger picture, which is just trying to see this through the lens of, once you understand that the U.S. is trying to re-implement the Monroe Doctrine, which was pre-World War I of, we care about the Western Hemisphere. Nobody else comes into the Western Hemisphere, but we also don't go outside of it. Our influence being, North, Central, and South America. Then them trying to re-implement that stance and saying we're not getting caught up in all of the world's bullshit, then all of this starts to make a lot more sense, which is, we're going to kick you out of our back door. We're going to try to be not as interventionist overseas. And I think this is what we're going to see play out over the next 5 years or so. And yeah, my point being just, all of these things are a factor at once, because even if you look at, okay, the oil is a factor, but then also the drug thing, I do think is also a factor in the sense where all of that trade ends up financing political and terrorist ends as well. It's not just that the cocaine is hurting Americans or whatever.
No, that's just what they're using. That's the excuse they're using. Yeah.
It funds Hezbollah and it funds these more militias and stuff. And then there's also the immigration aspect as well, with Venezuelans flooding the American border. So it's kind of like, hey, as long as Venezuela is as poor as it is and people are going to be fleeing there, then this is a border issue for us. So we also have to overthrow you guys so that you guys can have some prosperity, hopefully, and you guys stop coming into our country illegally.
Yeah, I mean,
but it could also double that down. If chaos ends up getting worse, it could actually make the migrant issue worse.
I think things will improve down there. I think it will take a little while. And just one last thing, I think you and I both sound a little bit on the fence whether it's good or bad. And I don't want to sound like I don't have an opinion, but my opinion is that some of this is good and some of this is bad. Mm-hmm. So there are pros and cons. It's not that I don't have an overarching opinion on the whole thing. It's just that there's 10 to 15 different points to look at. Some are good, some are bad. Overall, it just is what it is right now.
Yeah, 100%.